All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Lasting Learning Podcast. As you all know, this is a podcast where we talk about education, but we don't just talk about school. We get to know the people behind the mission. We get to really explore the why as well as the what. And the last few weeks, we've had some pretty amazing people on here talking to us about their why, what makes them tick, what makes them passionate, what makes them smile, sometimes even what makes them cry. Today, we've got an absolutely phenomenal person, a phenomenal educator, a phenomenal trainer, writer, speaker, jack of all trades joining us. Today, we are joined by Starr Sackstein with us, who is just going to wow us with her wisdom, her knowledge, and herself. So Starr, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dave. That's a lot to live up to right there, I'm thinking.
Well, you know what's cool is I didn't have to invent any of that. It's all true.
Yes. Every day is a learning experience for me. And honestly, I don't know, the last few years, I kind of took my foot off the brakes and just kind of let it rip a little bit. Took it where it went. So I'm learning a lot because I'm not staying in the same place long enough to really get bored.
That's so cool. And that's what I want to tackle a little bit today, if that's all right. You know, I've followed your journey here the last few years, and you described it in a way that I couldn't articulate, but I think you just summed it up. It's like you are always on the go. And can you just talk to us a little bit? Who are you? What are you doing? And how'd you get where you are?
Okay. So in the most current, Starr Sackstein 3.0, where we are right now, I am consulting for the Core Collaborative. I'm also working with them on they have a publishing house, Mimi and Todd Press, and I've been serving as their developmental editor and project manager, which is completely new. I mean, I've written a bunch of books, but I have never been on the other side of it, helping other authors kind of find their voice, except, of course, in the classroom,
right,
as a writing instructor for, high school kids getting ready for college. So that's what I'm doing now. I love the few times I've had the opportunity so far to get out and work with teens. There is nothing better than going into a space with people who are willing to do the work and want to be stretched and are eager and hungry to kind of bring it to their kids.
Not having to sell it first. Yeah.
No, and as a leader, which is what I did for the last 2 years before I decided to not do that anymore, you spend a lot of your time trying to get people on board. And I'm not a do it my way or no way kind of person. I'm more of a, how can I get everybody involved in a way that makes sense for them so that we could be better as a team and everybody's bringing their A game because that's what they want to do and not because I'm forcing them to do it. But I find that being in leadership roles has a fair amount of bureaucracy, and I am not very good with authority. So being an authority is even more challenging because...
Are you saying you're a little rebellious?
A little, just a little. I've been probably my whole life kind of marching just outside of the norm. So yeah, and it's been a long road. I started my teaching career in 2001 in the inner city in New York, and I basically was so afraid of doing things wrong back then that I spent all night preparing my lessons and going into school the next day trying to do it just the way I was taught. Kind of like I'm supposed to have answers about what literature means, and there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, and if kids aren't turning in their work they need to be penalized. And I made so many rookie mistakes the first 5 years of my career, but it was like I look back now and I'm like, well, you could certainly see the learning curve from then to now, because I mean, I'm pretty, aside from my ability to connect with kids, which I was always pretty good at, because I'm all tattooed up. I have purple hair. I've always done kind of odd things that drew teenagers to me in their own ways, because I think they got that I was a kindred spirit of some kind that wasn't going to judge them or really judge them, just be a safe space for them to go to. And, that's being an English teacher, you get a lot of confessions from kids anyway in their writing.
Written form, and so it's kind of cool to me to hear your journey, and some of that I think people can probably just pick up on by looking at your social media that you are kind of this, I don't want to say rebel or renegade, but you're a person that does kind of color outside the lines and does things your way. Yet the bulk of your work is dealing with assessment, which is interesting. It could almost seem like a paradigm where assessment is boxing people in and checking the boxes and making sure everything is right or, right or wrong. How did you develop this love, passion, or expertise in assessment, especially somebody that you said made a bunch of rookie mistakes and just stayed within the line so much?
Right. So assessment for me, I could totally geek out on it. Like it's my
me too. So let's
go. So I think it was just that. Like I realized the way the system works is just so freaking broken. And I would meet these kids who are so smart, but weren't performing on tests or didn't want to come to school or weren't submitting work for a plethora of reasons. But I knew they had it. We had conversations, their depth of knowledge was super deep, and they had great ideas about things, and they were really curious about everything. And it wasn't just in my English classes, but in my journalism classes too, where, you see all these things about kids, and the assessment, if you will, or the test or whatever it was, is somehow disappointing at the end of the day, because you have these really, really interesting people who are being shut out by school because of the way we label them. And I am not a person who really digs labels to begin with. I've always kind of been a bit of an other. If I had to label myself, I'd go with other. And that otherness that kind of makes me unique in a lot of ways kind of helped me see that in kids. And I think as soon as we start labeling kids, we are robbing them of their essence. And that's sort of where my assessment migration sort of started to happen. And because I was teaching not only core English classes, but also journalism elective classes, and having kids in a newspaper that was already so student-centered, the way the class ran was, it was all them. I was just there to make sure they didn't get arrested, brought up, having the school sued for libel or whatever it was. My job was to make sure they were doing it right. But I was allowing them to make all of the decisions. And it was such a natural environment to build a space like that, where kids could choose what role they wanted to play. They could choose what they wanted to write about, what they valued. They were working in teams because the editors, it was in 11th and 12th grade. The way my school worked at that time is everyone took foundations of journalism in the 9th grade, and it's a pretty small school in New York City, in Queens. And I usually taught that every other year or something. I taught a 10th grade mixed media class, which kind of exposed them to all the different kinds of publications we had at the school. And then they chose a track for 11th and 12th grade. And I was in charge of the newspaper, which started as print, but then we kind of morphed into an online media outlet that sort of allowed them to take whatever creative space they wanted to take. And the first challenge with that is, how do you grade writing? I mean, you shouldn't really, because surely grammar and conventions are pretty specific, but if kids are doing a good job in developing voice, they're breaking rules on purpose. So again, even with a rubric, how do you grade writing? How do you grade reading? How do you grade? It just felt so antithetical to what I was trying to do with trying to get kids to take risks and put themselves out there. So we just had to find another way. And that's what we did.
It's so cool. And there's probably some people listening right now that are probably thoroughly confused, because we're talking about assessment, yet talking about breaking rules. And it sounds like it shouldn't fit, but I think you kind of described it, that what you're trying to get people to understand is that assessment doesn't have to fit within a box either. That oftentimes we've taken the easy out and just made assessments, tests, quizzes, these paper pencil things that don't truly get to the reality of the person. I've had this definition of assessment for a long time, where it's an external attempt to determine what's on the inside. So an external attempt to make inferences about internal knowledge. Yep. And I think that you define that by just who you are. You talk about that you've got purple hair and tats, and you're kind of unconventional, and there are probably some people that look at that and come up with a definition of who you are. And I would argue that probably that's not all you are. There's a lot more to you, right?
I hope. I sure hope so.
Right. So you spend some time on the road, you speak, you've done TED Talks, you've done it all. Do you ever get people that look at the persona of Starr and come up with a judgment of you, and then you start speaking and they say something stupid like, oh, wow, I didn't expect you to whatever.
So it's funny you should say that. Growing up, I also was kind of marched to my own beat. Maybe hadn't found the beat I wanted to march to yet, but it certainly wasn't the same as everybody else beat. And folks, especially in high school, were mercilessly cruel to me, except for the kids who, I was in all honors classes, so they knew I was smart, and I played a lot of sports, so I had friends who were in sports with me who weren't the people I hung out with necessarily. But and then, I mean, the people who really knew me, who were my heart, were like the artsy people, because I also sang in 3 different, we had like a show choir and a concert chorale and a chorus. So I was with like the artsy kids who were the ones who were going to Dead shows with me and kind of knew who I was, who I am on the inside, and kind of looked past what seemed so evident to everybody based on what they thought they knew about me. And that has been true, I think, in my adult life as well, that people see an exterior and they make a lot of assumptions. Teachers are completely guilty of this too, because additionally, when you're first meeting a kid, if you're teaching 12th grade, you have 4 years worth of other people's identities of that child walking into the space before you, and they look at your roster and they're like, oh, that kid is, fill in the blanks. And I have always had a very unique and effective way of working with those kids. I love them, frankly. The harder they are for everybody else, the more gratifying it was when I could just see them as a person, treat them with respect, and allow them to be who they were in the space that we shared. And then get everyone in the class also to see each other that way, so that as a group, we could learn together. And I think that that's part of what made those learning spaces such a fertile ground for me to start breaking these rules, because I would be in the middle of a class, I'd have an idea, drive it to work. I have one that I remember in particular around Pride and Prejudice one year, which not a very traditional, yes, but not one kids would necessarily identify with today. And I was like, it would be really cool if each kid in the class was assigned a character and they had to personify that character, and we were going to have a dinner party, and I was going to have them all sit down after we read the book, and they would have to be the character, come to class dressed up, sit around the long table, and bring an item they think represents them to the meal that could then be their sort of entry point into a conversation. And I had crazy ideas like this all the time. And I'd get into class and I'd be so excited about it. Like, we're going to do this. And I mean, not really thinking so much about logistics of how it was going to happen. So my directions often sucked. Sometimes I had to sort of like, oh, I thought it was going to look like this. And we'd be like 20 minutes into class and they were trying hard to do what I asked them to do, but it made no sense. So I'd be like, all right, we're going to stop now. And we're going to do a reset. You're going to go back to the text. You're going to prepare a little bit more. And then tomorrow we're going to come in after you've had an opportunity to really go back to the text and think about this and try it again. What do you think we need to do differently? And I started inviting their feedback into what was going on and even in how we approached the text. And before long, it was no longer me coming up with a list of questions I wanted to ask or a list of excerpts I wanted to explore. It was more like an opportunity for them to tell me their understanding and context and sort of break the mold that there was a right way to read a classic text and a wrong way to read it. It was always my contention that if you could find evidence in the text, then it's true. So let's not feel so worried about doing the right thing and worry more about stretching the rest of us in this space with something that you thought was interesting that some scholar from Harvard hasn't thought of yet. So stop going on the websites looking to see what everybody else wrote about, and really just let it be your own. And then how do you assess that? So, I mean, reflections sort of started coming in a lot, because how often do kids not turn in work and we're like 0, and then they're average tanks, and they know so much anyway. So like, I felt like reflection was this opportunity for them to fill in the gap about what I was seeing and what was actually happening on the inside, like what you were just saying before assessment was.
Yeah.
And then when I started to read through their texts, read through their assignments, I'd read their reflections first instead of after. And then that gave me a solid lens to be able to really look at their work the way they looked at it. And then I could give them really specific targeted feedback that was based on what they were trying to do instead of what I wanted them to do. And I think that that's just where it all started and changed.
I think it's, you brought up a whole lot there, and it's all so good. I think often in education today, we place these initiatives and programs in these silos. And when we're looking at school improvement processes or ways to improve our current department, building, grade level, district, whatever it is, we say, okay, this year our big initiative is going to be on SEL, social emotional learning, or this year we're going to put a lot of our stock in relationships, or this year it's all about assessment. But I think what you just nailed is that it's all together. It's all the same. You cannot have a good assessment practice if the kids don't feel safe enough to come share in any modality that works for them, to share truly their heart and their spirit. And you're not going to get the kids to feel safe unless you've got a relationship and a connection with them. I mean, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. You know, you talk about assessment, but I haven't heard you talk scale scores and RIT points and percentiles. You're talking making connections with kids. That's so cool.
Well, I mean, and then it also starts with, okay, so maybe on the first or second assignment, you're helping them get feedback so they know what goals they need to be setting for themselves. But then once they've received some feedback on their writing or some of their presentational skills or whatever you're working on in your class, because the standards do need to be an anchor point.
Absolutely.
And I know Paul talked about that the other day too. Like, we can't be so broad in what we're doing in our spaces, but there are definitely there's a skill set we want kids to walk away from formal education with. I don't think skill and drill is the way to get them to that point. I think living it, being really, really fluent in the language of what we do and why we do it, and making sure that that's a part, that vocabulary is a part of how we discuss learning in our spaces. And then also with that, having them understand that big why, and then be able to communicate that they are proficient in doing something, but they're struggling with something else. So especially at the 11th and 12th grade level, which is where I was teaching, we want them to be able to advocate for themselves. So again, giving them that language so that they could say, I don't know what a transition is. How do I do that? Because you can't just hand somebody a 5-page typed essay and say, is this good? Right. You kind of have to be a little more articulate about what kind of feedback you want to get from me. So what are you struggling with? Talk to me. And then that conversation is what spawns the goal setting and the feedback, and then the strategic feedback and action planning to make your specific needs take your writing to where you're going next. And then the assessment piece, it's more like a level of mastery. Is this piece communicated well? Did it hit the mark with what you were trying to do? And if it were up to me, it would never get a grade. It would just, what are you strong with now? And what do you need to keep working on?
So let's take that and spin it personally towards you, because part of who you are right now is you are an author. I mean, you've written books for ASCD, you've written books for Hack Learning, you've written books for David's Consulting, you've got, now you're working with the Core Collaborative, you've got a lot of stuff out there. How do you measure your own success with that? How do you grade yourself, if you will?
So, and I had this conversation with Connie Hamilton once while she was writing Hacking Questions. It's never going to be perfect. And I am a recovering perfectionist. I spent the larger part of my childhood trying to be perfect in every way, shape, or form, and was very hard on myself. I missed a lot of opportunities to enjoy my life because I was trying so hard to do everything right. And it was in stark contrast with a lot of other things that I believed,
Sure.
but, you know, fitting in that box of doing everything really very well. Writing is one of these crazy things that no matter how good you get at it, you're always evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And your voice is evolving with who you are. I mean, I'm a 42-year-old person now. When I started teaching, I was 24. So who I am as a person has surely changed. I have a son who's in high school. I've been married. I have a second marriage that I have now. That's, you know, there are things in my life that have happened that have shaped my experience. And I think that in shaping my experience, the way that I approach the work that I do has changed as well. I'm not as hard on myself. I try to hear that inner voice. Dan Tricarico, who wrote The Zen Teacher and also Sanctuaries, he always says that we can't be so hard on ourselves in a lot of these ways. And when we think about the bigger picture about how we present and how we move through things, you have to understand that it's just what it is for right now. And then you'll move on to the next one. Like I kind of joke, the book that I wrote for Dave Burgess, which is my most recent one, From Teacher to Leader, was all about my first year of leadership. And I only stayed in that leadership position for 2 years. So I joked that I would write another book on, you know, from leader to consultant. Because I think when you take big risks, sometimes they don't go the way you expect them to.
Right.
And I had every intention of being in that leader position until my son graduated from high school at the least, and he's in 9th grade now. And I really wanted to make a home there, but at 42, I don't need to stay where I don't want to be anymore. Like if there's no love in something, I don't need a 10-year time frame for me to get that I need to move on. And I need to be okay with that because time's just too precious. We get so little of it that we're on this earth doing the things that we need to do, that spending any time in a space that you're not happy in is, I'm not going to call it a waste of time, because I'm sure you're learning. And I'm going to say, I'm reluctant to use curse words, but you learn a shit ton of things, right? Through bad times and good times. And even if you're in a bad situation, I get that you'll probably take something positive out of it if you have the right mind frame around it. But wouldn't it be better if you had joy in your life every single day and you can make a choice to be in a position? And Paul from the Core Collaborative, they always say to me, him and Tony are always like, are you happy with what you're doing? How could we make you happier with what you're doing? Happiness is such a big part of working with this team of people that it's like the twilight zone sometimes, because in schools, you don't really get that, unfortunately. You get directives and you get new initiatives that are building on top of other initiatives that sometimes contradict the old initiatives. And then there are test scores that are public and all of these things that just rob educators and children of their dignity. It goes against everything I believe, which is why I couldn't stay in that role. It wasn't the district or the people. I love the district and I love the people. I did not like the role. I did not like being in that position. It was a bad fit for me.
Okay. Before we started.
You got really quiet there for a second.
I'm sorry. Before we started, before I hit record, I cautioned you and said, okay, I'm going to try my best not to make you cry. You just said, I'm trying my best not to curse. I'm trying my best not to curse at you because you made me cry. There's so much wisdom in what you just said. And I hope people go back and move the little finger across the line at the bottom of the screen and listen to that little snippet that you just said all over again. And I'm going to shrink it down real quick for people that are in schools. You know, the idea behind everything we do in schools is to prepare kids for life, not just to prepare them to play school forever.
Right.
And we've got all these things out there. You know, just I'll use your current expertise of assessment. We talk about retakes and redos, and the idea that we're supposed to monitor where we are so we can constantly measure progress to make sure we're growing and we are improving, not so that we can stay where we are. And you just articulated a your mindset for life is you have to constantly assess where you are. You have to assess whether or not you are personally growing. And if not, do something about it. Don't slap a label on yourself and say, guess I'm just gonna be sad. I guess this is my lot in life. I guess this is where I'm supposed to be forever. You've got to find ways to jump on board something different in all frames of life. Whether it's your career or wherever you are, you've got to take those chances and go for it while you can. Damn you, Starr.
You know what it is though? Like, there were a lot of things about leadership that I loved. For a brief period of time, every single week, I had the opportunity to be the leader I always wanted. I got into classrooms, I co-taught with my teachers, I modeled lessons, I planned with them, I tried to make their lives better. I tried to never ask them to do things that I wouldn't do myself. And I always wanted, I always felt very misunderstood as a teacher. A lot of times my leaders didn't have as much expertise or as much experience as I had.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how to give me feedback and they weren't helping me grow. So I did national board certification. Like, I need to be growing to thrive. I need to be trying new things to thrive. And sometimes that journey will keep me at a school for 9 years, like it did at WJPS. And sometimes it'll keep me in a district for 2, like it did with West Hempstead, because you get what you need from an experience, you assess, like you said, and then you make a decision as to whether or not you want to take another risk. And it's always a risk. And that means that it might not turn out the way that you want. Like, you know, the leadership shift that I did, that wasn't the way I thought it was going to go, but that's the way it went. And now I'm here. And it's a little too new to judge whether or not it's the right step yet. But I have always wanted to work with schools who have wanted to change the way they look at assessment. And now I could do my passion work all the time with people who are calling me to do it. So it's like they've read Hacking Assessment. They're like, we want to do this with our kids, but we're not really ready to get rid of grades completely.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we start?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like music to my ears. It's like, okay, well, you know, you can start with learning intentions and success criteria like Hattie speaks about, or you could start doing project-based learning and stop testing. You can offer kids multiple opportunities to work from a place of strength instead of a place of deficit. And you can stop labeling kids like right now, like
Boom.
A kids, your B kids, like just get rid of all those labels. You have children whose minds you need to mold and help them find their own way, especially at the secondary level. You know, you create environments that foster their ability to sort of march to their own beat and feel good about it, you know?
You talk about marching to your own beat. I'm curious about a couple of things with that, just dealing with assessment. So in my own walk, I was a lot like you, where I'll say I was traditional, made those rookie mistakes, but it was really rookie arrogance. It wasn't even mistakes. I thought this is how it's supposed to be. And had I not had some people come into my life and push some buttons and make me question things, they wouldn't have been rookie mistakes. They would have turned into veteran mistakes. But for me, it was like Rick Wormley, for example, who just asked all those questions. And my mind evolved. But even some of my thinking is not lockstep with his thinking, but it revolutionized my thinking. And then it caused me to go look up Stiggins and Wiggins and all these other people. Where was your awakening?
Ken O'Connor.
Okay, that'll do it.
And what's funny is Ken and I have met now, and I mean, there have been a few people. Like, I remember the first time I met Alan November also, and like when he direct messaged me on Twitter, I actually like ran around my apartment for like 10 minutes going, oh my God, he knows who I am, you know. And where, you know, the first time I got a direct message from Alfie Kohn, like, there are people whose work deeply inspires me. And Ken O'Connor's 15 Fixes for Broken Grades, I read that book and I must have been so ready to get the message, because I read it and I was like, I am doing so many things wrong and it's hurting kids. Like, it made so much sense. And then as I started on that journey, Ken didn't go far enough. He still believes in ultimately an educator's responsibility to put a score on things at the end.
Sure.
I don't really ascribe to that belief. I understand that systems require it, and I think that there are ways to do it, like having assessment conferences with your students where they're telling you how much they've learned and where they feel they are on the mastery continuum. And if a score needs to go on a report card, you guys can co-construct what that's going to look like together. And I think that's the best way to do a bad thing. So there are no surprises, and there's a deep dive into what they actually know and can do. And they've collected this work in a portfolio, and they're able to articulate where they've learned and where they're still working. And if they could do that, I don't really care what grade they tell me to put on their report card. It's so inconsequential to me.
Right.
I know it matters to parents, but for me, that conversation is what does it. And Ken definitely stretched me. And then Mark Barnes and I started kind of grooving in the same way. We were both a part of the Connected Educators series. I had my blogging book and he had the iStudent book. And when we were paired up to speak together at ISTE a bunch of years ago through Corwin, him and I developed a really great relationship. And then, I wrote the hacking assessment book after he wrote Assessment 3.0 and Role Reversal, which were also two very influential books on my journey to get to where I am. So, and then you have Connie, who I did hacking homework with, and now is like family. You know, she's so smart and she challenges me all the time, and she's so supportive, and people don't know who she is. They should.
They will soon, because I'm chatting with her very, very soon here. So they'll find out. You bring up some awesome points. I really appreciate you practice what you preach. I mean, that's like the message of this. It's you understand. Now we talk about assessment and all that, which is great, but you understand that educators still own some power to make some decisions, and that there are ways to do things that are outside of the norm that are still okay, and that there's not a script to follow. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say as well, that what you want people to do is question what they're doing, but they don't need to pick up what Starr has done and say, okay, this is the new script. If I simply follow this, I will find immediate success. Your job is to make them question things so they can start to paint outside the box. And there you go. Yeah. If you can't see, so if you're watching the audio, she just pulled up her sleeve and showed that big question mark tat right there. Yeah. You want people to question. I don't want to say question reality. That sounds very grandiose, but question
everything.
Everything. Yeah. It truly, that's where it starts. It's Socrates at heart, the Socratic method. You learn through questions. And as educators, professionals, we're not just going to put on the show and act like we're lifelong learners. We have to be lifelong questioners. We have to question who we are, what we're doing, if we're happy, if we're successful, if we're growing, you name it, and you do it.
I try. I certainly try. But it doesn't mean, I think that that's the best part of the journey is like something that works for me right now, or probably if you think about your career in the spaces that it's been in, I don't know how many schools you've been in or how many roles you've been in, but like things can work for right now.
Yep.
And if I explore in another year from now, based on where I am, if that's still working, like my biggest takeaway usually when it comes to the grading stuff isn't that I expect people to agree with me that grades have no place, although that would be awesome.
That'd be amazing,
if they agreed with me on that. I want people to question why they have the assessment practices that they have. If it's not, as long as it's because that's the way it's always been, which is usually what the answer is, or the system expects us to have a grade on the report card. That's another one of my favorite ones. The system is desperately broken. I mean, that's something I think we can all sort of agree on.
Right, but the system is us.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We have the power. And sometimes even from the interior of our single classroom, we have the power to make a profound difference in a community. Because kids talk. So, I mean, especially in a high school setting, if you're in more than one room and word gets around, but in this class, we're doing this and it works really well. If other people are curious in your space, which you hope they will be, they'll come around and ask questions.
And we got to get past the barrier of saying, well, my boss won't let me, the system expects. It's all a bunch of BS. They just don't know. And I guarantee you go out there and you do something different and generate amazing results, they're going to be just fine with what you're doing.
Well, that's it. You will make mistakes. And even people who read Hacking Assessment and they're like, I'm going to try this. And I'm like, well, it's a jumping off point. This is where, this is what worked for my kiddos. It doesn't mean it's going to work for yours. This is just an idea that took me 5 years to even get it down to a system that wasn't so much work. I made so many mistakes. I still make so many mistakes. I'm just really comfortable with the mistakes now. Like it's not with that whole perfectionism thing. It's not like a disease when you make a mistake now. It's more like an opportunity.
Good.
Well, it has to be, right? Because I'm going to make them. It happens. So.
Yeah. So good. So good. You are giving me tons to think about. I think, Starr, I'm going to be reaching out to you so we can do a part 2 of this really, really soon, because this is good stuff. I want to try to wrap it up because I think people that are listening to this right now, their heads are spinning and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I've got some room to grow. I've got some room to change, some room to improve, which is good. It's a good place to be when you feel that excitement. So, I tend to tell everybody this is the most popular podcast in the world. Not true, but it will be. Because
you got to think it. You got to believe it.
That's right. There are literally 7 billion people that are going to listen to your voice right now. Every single person across the world. They've got the headsets in. They're listening to the translations, whatever. They want to know, Starr, you're a genius. You're brilliant. Tell us, what do we need to do to keep growing? What do you tell them?
Don't allow fear to get in your way. Don't let someone tell you can't. Just do it. Just do it. And if you trip, if you fall, get back up again, try again. Just do it. If you can imagine it, it could be, just like you said, this is the most popular podcast in the world. Maybe it will be.
Yeah, it will be now.
There you go.
and I'm just going to reiterate again that that's not just some platitude that we tell kids. Go out there and risk failure, take big chances. You are a person who admittedly lived the beginning part of your life, the bulk of your life, so fearful of making mistakes and not seeming perfect, and that it boxed you in. As perfect as you were, that was the biggest flaw. Yeah. And now that you are embracing that, you're probably happier and healthier than you've ever been.
Trying to be.
That's so good.
What's crazy about perfection, I will say this, is the better you perform, the more pressure there is to perform.
Yeah.
So you go out, at least if you were like me, trying to appear a certain way, you go out and you do a lot of stupid things, and then you spend a lot of time shaming yourself for doing those things. And it's sort of this vicious cycle of, I have to be perfect, but I need to just get a break from trying to be perfect, and then doing something insanely stupid because you just have to get out of your own way for a little bit. And then it's, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. How could somebody like me do something like that? And then all of these negative self-talk things go on. And then it's this horrible, vicious cycle. So, I mean, so glad to get off that hamster wheel because.
And you're giving me, I appreciate this pep talk personally. This is good stuff. It's really good. It's really good. All right. Well, Starr, I'm gonna wrap this up because I'm gonna have to go get some Kleenex and wipe my eyes. You are just an absolutely phenomenal educator. You're doing amazing things, but more than that, you're an awesome person. And I am so glad that we got to connect like this and share who you are with so many others. I know that there are people listening to this right now that are just growing and they're saying, thank you for giving me this freedom to just do what's best for me and what's best for my kids and what's best for my school. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule today.
Thanks.
Absolutely.